Welcome to France. The year is 1789. And the French economy is in doldrums. The common man, overburdened with taxes by the monarchy, is outraged to see that the king, his nobles, and the clergy are living a life of opulence and extravagance while he is being made to pay for it. He remonstrates against the unjust order of the day, seeking liberty, equality, and fraternity. The king tries his best to salvage the situation. But far from redressing the woes of the common man, the rigid socio-economic order of the time gives little room to the king to make amends, worsening the situation and drawing the ire of the common man, which snowballs into a revolution that reverberates across the continent and across the oceans into far-off lands. This is the story of the French Revolution, a watershed event in world history that had a profound impact on not only France and Europe, but also across the world. In this video, we are going to tell you all the major reasons due to which the French population revolted against their administration, its unfolding and its repercussions on Europe and the world beyond. But before we begin, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more captivating historical content. So, fasten your seatbelts and brace yourselves as we unravel the story of one of the greatest revolutions in the history of mankind, that is, the French Revolution. During the eve of the French Revolution, the French society was divided into three classes called estates: the First Estate, the Second Estate, and the Third Estate. The First Estate consisted of the clergy. It was the most powerful class in the kingdom and exercised an extraordinary influence on the government and administration. They were wealthy and owned 1/5 of all the land in France. In addition to their vast possessions, the church also collected from the people a tax called tithe, which was 1/10 of the annual produce or earnings for the support of the church and clergy. Their vast possessions and enormous income made them very independent and powerful. They refused to offer their income and property to tax, claiming that since they were dedicated to God, they were not subject to taxation. The Second Estate consisted of the nobility. They enjoyed great privileges and collected their own taxes apart from those levied by the church and the king. It was quite common for the nobleman to have a right to a certain portion of the peasant's crops. Occasionally he could collect a toll on sheep and cattle driven past his house. Sometimes he maintained the only mill, wine press, an oven within a certain district, and would require anyone using it to pay him a share of the product. They also enjoyed the exclusive privilege of hunting. This did a lot of damage to the crops of the peasants. Many manors had huge pigeon houses which were hated by the peasants as the pigeons would eat the seeds sown by them. The First and the Second Estates were the privileged class of the French society, which enjoyed privileges like grants, land ownership, and exemption from payment of taxes. The Third Estate consisted of everyone who did not belong to either the clergy or the nobility. Historians believe that the members of the Third Estate constituted nearly 98% of the French population. While they formed a huge part of the French population, they hardly had any political or social rights. They were oppressively taxed by the clergy and the nobility apart from the king. But when it came to redressing their problems, they could not count on any of the three. The members of the Third Estate also suffered from frequent famines and food shortages, while the monarch, his nobles, and the clergy reveled in their estates and palaces. The members of the First and Second Estate wielded a huge influence on the monarch and never agreed to share the burden of taxation on themselves. Thus, it was the members of the Third Estate who, despite all their hardships, had to pay taxes to the monarch so that he could live a merry life at Versailles with his family and plan and wage wars to satiate his ego and pride. To the clergy in the name of God and for the benefit of the church. To the noblemen so that he could exploit them further. The Bourbon monarchs in France claimed to rule by the will of God, that is, by divine right. They were absolute monarchs and did not care about the interests of their subjects. The French monarchs lived a life of opulence, extravagance, and pomp at Versailles, while the common man was made to pay for their monarch's opulent life and lived in misery. France, which had a long-standing rivalry with England, had waged costly wars on England, including the American Revolution, for the prestige and pride of the French monarchs. Not only did these costly wars not yield any material gains to France, but they also brought the state to the brink of bankruptcy and burdened the state with debt. To finance the numerous wars that were being fought to satiate the ego of the monarch, the government levied various taxes on the French subjects. While the privileged classes, that is, the members of First and the Second Estate, were exempt from payment of these taxes, the Third Estate had to bear the brunt of these costly wars and the monarch's extravagant spending and opulent lifestyle. Following were the major forms of taxes that were levied in the 18th century France. Taille. The taille was a form of direct tax, levied on land, and was one of the most resented impositions on the peasantry. The burden of this tax fell disproportionately on the members of Third Estate, comprising commoners and peasants, who were already grappling with economic hardships. Vingtieme, instituted in 1749, the vingtieme was another form of direct tax amounting to 1/20th of an individual's income. Initially intended to be temporary, it persisted and added to the financial strain on the populace. The payment of these taxes was evaded by the privileged class. Hence the burden fell squarely on the Third Estate, resulting in an uneven distribution of the tax burden, intensifying class disparities and fueling resentment against the monarchy. Gabelle. The gabelle was a deeply unpopular tax on salt, which is an essential commodity. Its regressive nature, combined with the government's monopoly on salt production and distribution, burdened the common people disproportionately. Smuggling of salt became a widespread practice as a form of resistance to this oppressive tax. Of all the fiscal agents, the salt collector, called gabellus, was the most detested. They often took advantage of their position and searched primarily women. Ironic as it sounds, women were actually the ones who often smuggled salt under their dresses or even used false derrieres known as faux cols to hold their salt cargo. Some smugglers would stage fake funerals where coffins were filled with salt, bake loaves of bread consisting of nothing but a thin crust of bread surrounding a salt core, train dogs to carry special jackets filled with salt. Thousands of arrests were made. Offenders were punished with punishments ranging from paying an extra fine to imprisonment and even death sentences. Aides were a form of indirect taxes levied on various goods such as wine, tobacco, and cloth. Aides were often collected inefficiently, leading to corruption and evasion. The burden of aides fell heavily on the lower classes, exacerbating social inequalities. Octroi. The octroi was a tax levied on goods entering cities, acting as a barrier to trade. This tax hindered economic activity and contributed to the economic woes faced by merchants and artisans. Its impact was particularly significant in urban centers. Corvée. While not a conventional tax, the corvée was a form of forced labor imposed on the peasantry. It required individuals to work on public infrastructure projects, such as roads and bridges, without remuneration. The corvée added to the economic hardships faced by the rural population. Capitation. Instituted to address the financial crisis, the capitation was a per-person tax that aimed to distribute the tax burden more evenly. However, its implementation was flawed, and the wealthy often found ways to evade or minimize their contributions, further deepening societal divisions. The multifaceted tax system in France on the eve of the French Revolution played a pivotal role in stoking the flames of discontent that ultimately led to widespread social unrest. The burden of taxation fell disproportionately on the common people, exacerbating existing economic disparities and contributing to a growing sense of injustice. The Age of Reason, that is, the period from 1715 to 1789, has been credited to be the main cause for the outbreak of the revolution. The men who brought about this social awakening called themselves philosophes. They did not advocate for a violent revolution but spoke against ancient abuses, and questioned the rationale of the prevalent social and economic malpractices, causing social awakening among the masses. Among the many philosophes, the names of Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau find special mention when we speak of the French Revolution. Montesquieu was a polished and an eminent lawyer. He was well versed in history. His writings were the result of systematic and careful thought. He stood for a constitutional form of government and believed in the supremacy of law. He believed that liberty could be achieved only if there was a separation of power. He wrote The Spirit of Laws, which was a product of 20 years of research. This was a study of political philosophy, an analysis of various forms of governments and their merits and demerits. Voltaire, he was the foremost champion of reason and tolerance during the 18th century. His name is permanently associated with the campaigns whose motto was, "Crush the infamous thing," which was against religious authority. He is famous for his essay on the manners and spirit of nations. In his Treatise on Tolerance, in thousands of letters he denounced the infamous thing. He fought intolerance with deeds as well as words. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, in his famous work, The Social Contract, Rousseau argued that all men had certain natural rights and liberties, which were life, liberty and property, and that men no longer owed obedience to any government that failed to protect them in those rights and liberties. In this book, he also outlined the tenets of a civil religion which directly inspired the revolutionaries of 1793 to 94. But his greatest contribution is his doctrine of popular sovereignty, with its attendant corollaries of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Realizing that the economy of France was at a deplorable level, the French king, Louis XVI, did his best to save the situation. He appointed good and sound financial advisors to turn around the economy of France, but to no avail. The first among these was Robert Jacques Turgot, who was appointed as Controller General of Finances by the King Louis XVI in 1774. Turgot was a prominent French economist and statesman. He undertook a series of ambitious and often controversial reforms aimed at modernizing and stabilizing the French economy. Despite his visionary economic ideas, Turgot's reforms faced intense opposition from powerful interest groups and conservative forces, earning him their hostility, who along with Queen Marie Antoinette, prevailed on the king to dismiss him. His tenure as Controller General of Finances was short-lived, and he was dismissed in 1776. Several months after Turgot's dismissal, Louis XVI appointed the famous banker Jacques Necker to take charge of the finances of France. He introduced several new reforms and policies. However, despite Necker's efforts to address France's financial woes, his tenure was marked by challenges and controversies. His policies faced opposition from conservative forces, including the nobility and other ministers. Necker's attempts to reform taxation and reduce privileges faced resistance, leading to his resignation in 1781. The immediate successor of Jacques Necker was Charles Alexander de Calonne, an intendant and a highly intelligent and resourceful person. His solution to financial ailments was the restoration of public confidence. The best way of doing this, according to him, was to give the appearance of prosperity. To do this, he tried to get credit and support the government with loans. Knowing the Parliament of Paris would veto a single land tax that all landowners would have to pay, Calonne persuaded Louis XVI to call an assembly of notables to vote on his referendum. Calonne's eventual reform package, which was introduced to the Assembly of Notables, consisted of 5 major points. Cut government spending. Revive free trade methods. Authorize the sale of church property. Equalize salt and tobacco taxes. Establish a universal land value tax. All these measures failed because of the powerlessness of the crown to impose them. As a last resort, Calonne proposed that the king abolish internal customs duties and implement a property tax on nobles and clergy. This suppression of privileges was badly received. Calonne was dismissed in 1787 and exiled. Having failed to raise the revenues he wanted by means of existing laws, King Louis XVI was compelled to at last seek additional taxing authority. As per historic precedent, such authority could be granted only by the Estates General. This body represented the 3 major estates of France which had not met since 1614. The king's call for the election of delegates in 1788 created much anticipation, because if the king wanted new taxes, he would have to make concessions to the assembled representatives. Unfortunately, right from the beginning, differences between the estates began to appear. The Third Estate demanded more representation, as they formed the bulk of the French population. Also, they demanded that votes be taken by count of heads in the total body of representatives. Their first demand was met, but the second was rejected. In this way, even before the Estates General was convened, fissures had erupted between the estates. Despite the population of the Third Estate vastly outnumbering the combined populations of the First and the Second Estates, they lacked proportionate representation in the Estates General and could be outvoted by the First and the Second Estates. Hence, before the meeting of the Estates General, members of the Third Estate began to mobilize support for equal voting rights, which would be on the basis of head count and not by status. While the Third Estate was of the opinion that fiscal and judicial reforms were the need of the hour, the nobles were against the idea of giving up the privileges they had enjoyed under the traditional system. When the meeting was convened, the question over the voting process turned into open hostility between the three estates, thus sidelining the original purpose for which the meeting had been convened. The meeting also saw authority of the king being neglected. Unable to persuade the upper two estates to sit and vote with them as one body, the representatives of the Third Estate walked out of the meeting. They declared that they were the only true representatives of the people and proclaimed themselves as the National Assembly of France. This proclamation, made on June 17, 1789, was the first sign of a crisis brewing up. The king, Louis XVI, was forced to take a decision. He sided with the upper two estates. So, when the deputies of the Third Estate came for the meeting on June 20, they found that the doors of the assembly were closed to them. This enraged the deputies of the Third Estate, who assembled in a nearby indoor tennis court. There the determined deputies took the tennis court oath, in which they swore never to separate and to reassemble wherever the circumstances demanded until the constitution of the realm was established and affirmed upon a solid basis. Within a few days, the National Assembly was joined by many priests from the First Estate, as well as 47 liberal nobles from the Second Estate. The king tried to intimidate this body by calling for his troops to Versailles. The people of Paris rallied behind the deputies of the Third Estate, who had declared themselves as the National Assembly. As law and order began to break down, men everywhere began to arm themselves for defense against the king's forces. The excitement in Paris, fed by rumors of troop movements, grew higher. A wave of revolutionary fervor spread throughout the countryside, which led to a peasants' revolt that saw many homes of tax collectors being burnt, as well as those of the aristocrats. On July 14, a Parisian mob, comprising of disgruntled workers, artisans, and other citizens, descended upon Bastille. Bastille was a fortress and state prison where arms and ammunition were stored. It was also a place where political prisoners were kept and was detested as a sign of despotism. The mob demanded arms from the Bastille. When its governor, Bernard-René Delaunay, refused to turn in the arms, the mob attempted to push their way in. After an exchange of gunfire, in which scores of attackers were killed, the governor agreed to surrender. The mob then rushed in and took over the fort. This was the starting point of the revolution. The storming of the Bastille marked a pivotal moment in the French Revolution, igniting the flames of change and inspiring the common man to break free from the centuries-old oppressive socio-economic order. This event fired up the imagination of the common man, sparking a collective belief in the possibility of liberation from the shackles of an antiquated social hierarchy. The common man was now ready to demand not only political change but also a fundamental restructuring of the socio-economic order. This event ultimately paved the way for the dismantling of feudal privileges and the establishment of a more egalitarian and democratic society. In the next video, we shall see how the French Revolution unfolded in the aftermath of the storming of the Bastille and the lasting impact it had on France and Europe and across the oceans into far-off places. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to subscribe, share, like, and drop your thoughts in the comments section below. And until next time, stay curious.